Today's topic, I will admit from the very start, is not my area of expertise. In United States, people who teach rhetoric and composition actually get a PhD in it. So there are two levels of composition studies and rhetorical studies. There are those who go and get a PhD in writing, in rhetorical studies or rhetoric and composition. And then there are those who teach those classes. Most of these classes are taught by graduate students or adjunct lecturers or just full-time lecturers. Now, every college in United States and university has two courses that are called first-year writing. It's either called English 101 or English 1101 and English 1102. And every undergraduate has to take these two classes. The purpose is that before they start taking advanced classes in their field of study, in their discipline or major, they have to take these writing classes. And the idea is that if they take these two courses, they will at least know the basics of research and then how to write and craft a paper. That's why it's called first-year writing. There are philosophical differences in the field. The school where I graduated from is Florida State. They call their program composition studies. So they are heavy on writing strategies and writing. UNT, where I taught for several years, is a rhetorics-based program. So they call themselves as rhetorics and composition. And the difference is the composition or the writing-heavy programs use the process method. And they actually teach the mechanics of how to write an essay. The rhetorics programs focus primarily on how to craft an argument, what are parts of an argument, and their hope is that if they teach these tools to the students, they themselves will be able to go and write good papers. That's slightly the philosophical difference. Today we are going to talk about composition and how to design a writing course. So as I mentioned, there are two parts to the course. In most English departments, 1101 doesn't focus on research. 1101 usually is about teaching students that writing is a process. And you don't just write once and turn it in. That's not your final version. You have to go through invention first, then composition, then revision, and then the ultimate final product. So that is what is called the writing process. And it is recursive. So sometimes you revise, but then you come back, get more feedback, and then revise again. So the idea that we are trying to emphasize and which we are trying to teach our students in these classes is that writing is a process. It has the pre-writing phase where you do your research, where you do your invention exercises, where you take your notes. Then it has a drafting stage where you actually write your first rough draft, share it with your colleagues or with your professors, get some feedback, and then go and revise it. And sometimes in 1101, in the first part, we do several revisions of an essay before the students turn in the final essay. So that is what is the process method of writing. Now in English 1101, it mostly focuses on expressive writing. So the first essay usually assigned or requested of students is kind of just a literacy narrative or just a narrative which is about their own lives, where they are, what do they aspire to do. Because the philosophy behind it is that before we encourage our students to go and seek anything other than themselves and research it, they should first learn to express themselves and capture, kind of their own personal history of how they got to the point where they are. So I remember when I came to United States, I had to take 2 years of bachelor's classes. So our professor in the English 1101, we started with a expressive essay, with an essay which was about our own selves, which was a narrative essay about our own literacy history. How did we get our education so far? Where do we come from? What are our experiences? And then we'll follow the process. Now, invention exercises can be different, right? Like you can just sit and jot down notes if you want to take notes. You can also do different exercises. For example, clustering. Clustering is when you put a central idea in the middle of a piece of paper, and then whatever comes to your mind, you cluster it around it, and then you connect it, and it kind of captures what's on your mind, what's in your subconscious, and then you use whatever you can. These are all invention exercises. But throughout the process, what is being emphasized is that writing is a process. You don't just sit down and write your final paper last day of the semester and turn it in. If you follow the process, you will write or produce a better paper at the end. Now, in our first year writing, the first part, 1101 or 101, usually the second essay used to be about writing about something else, a historical event, or another person, a biography. And what that did was it moved you from self to the other, to something outside of yourself. It still wasn't very research heavy. It was still opinion based and probably narrative based, but the idea was to move you from yourself to someone else. Now, for each writing course, usually student wrote, in my experience, even when I taught it as a graduate student, 3 to 4 essays per semester. Each essay, we first went through invention exercises and crafted a topic, generated ideas. The students workshopped it amongst themselves. We'll form them in groups and they'll talk about their topics. And then they turned in their first draft. We will give our comments on it. They'll go and revise it. Then they will turn it their second draft, which we will also comment on, and we'll probably do workshops on it too. And then mostly after the second draft is when they were invited to turn in a third draft. Now, when we went to the research, the second part of 101 or English 1102, which they take in their second semester, that was meant to teach them research methodologies, how to research a paper. Traditionally, in the first week, most of us will make an appointment with our liaison librarian, with our research librarian, and the class will go there and the research librarian will introduce them to all the databases that are available to them, how to research them, how to look up materials. And then the librarians, of course, will also tell them that they are available. Students could make an appointment, 30 minutes, 40 minutes with a research librarian and go and talk about their topic, and they could actually help them research their topic. Similarly, students were also taught in the very beginning that they have access to the English department writing lab or tutoring center or writing center. There are different terms used for it, and they could also make an appointment there where people would actually look at their drafts and give them an opinion about it or give them suggestions about it, the support mechanism. That is what is introduced in the first or second week. Then you start with the research process itself. You don't just write a paper. So the first discussion is usually, the professors don't give out topics, right, in most writing classes. You first do brainstorming and you ask each student, okay, what is it that you would like to write about? Most of the times what we did was that we kind of excluded the hackneyed topics, the irresolvable topics that are part of the American politics, abortion, gun rights, because those are things that a lot is being said about, but they are not resolvable anyway. So students would choose what they want to write about. They were encouraged to write about literary texts, but it could also be an essay about a historical event. It could be an essay about something current. And then the first thing that they will craft would be what possible thesis statement or controlling idea will they use, right? And then they will be taught, the professors teach them how to do research, how to look up resources, what is the gradation of resources. At the top of it are the academic journals, the scholarly books. Then we come down to more journalistic kind of works, newspapers, magazines, and then just any simple internet source. So they're taught how to grade the sources that they are using. They are also taught how to cite their sources, right? And that is, in English, we use MLA, but for social sciences and others, they can use Chicago or PMLA, but mostly we will use MLA, so each student will have a copy of the MLA handbook. So part of our teaching was the citation system itself, how to do block quotes, how to use individual quotes, and then the structure of the paper, right? So in the drafting process, you're teaching them how to come up with the topic, how to craft a thesis, how to use research resources, what is the gradation of different kinds of resources, and then how to craft the introduction to a paper, how to develop your discussion, how to craft a paragraph, right? What is a topic sentence? Like each paragraph has a topic sentence. That means that whatever you say in that paragraph has to be connected to that topic sentence. Beyond that, each paragraph has to somehow be connected to your thesis. And then what transitions you use when you move from one paragraph. What do you signal as a signal phrase? I have now discussed this. Now I will be moving on to this part of my discussion. And they do that in the first draft. When they have written a first draft, then they will turn it in to the professor. We will do in-class workshops and everything else. And then the professor responds to that first draft. You go and you don't grade it, but you give them suggestions. Okay, add something here, this doesn't make sense. And they take those suggestions and go and revise the paper. Okay, that is their second draft, right? Now, when they've had their second draft, they will come back and they will then do in-class workshop with their colleagues, which you monitor, and then they will turn in their second draft. Now you take the second draft and you then comment on it as a teacher or instructor, give them comments, give them your point of view, and then maybe if they're not doing another draft, they go and revise it and turn in the final paper. Now coming to the thesis statements, we traditionally taught three kinds of thesis statements, right? It could be just a descriptive thesis, right? It could be an analytical thesis, or it could be an argumentative thesis. A descriptive thesis simply is, in this essay, I would like to explain life in Islamabad, right? And then you just explain how people live there, what kind of classes are there. You're not adding any of your own opinion, you're just introducing something. The analytical one would be, here I would like to suggest that going to privates, what would it take to get into a private university, what kind of preparation you would need, and that is, it analyzes different aspects of doing something and then accomplishing it. The argumentative thesis usually is the most sophisticated, because that is where you're arguing for something, for or against, right? This novel internalizes class privilege, and that is bad. That is an argument. You're arguing for something. Depending on what thesis you use, your research methodologies would differ and your writing will be different. So that is what is also covered in the first year writing in the process method. We are trying to highlight throughout these two courses, what we're trying to teach our students is that writing is not sitting and producing a paper in one night. It is a process, right? That means you have to give yourself time to do the research, to gather your resources, and then to write a draft, revise it, rewrite it again, then come back and revise it, and maybe then you will have a final product. That is what is called the process approach. And that is what we are trying to teach them. Now, in my experience, since so much work is involved in teaching writing, most institutions will cap a first year writing class at 25. Ideally 20, but I have never been at an institution where people were told to teach 2 writing classes with 35 students each. No. At Florida State, our classes were capped at 25. At Kent State, they were capped at 25, and so was at UNT. Somehow, some research has shown that 25 is the maximum that a professor can handle. But think about it. If you are a lecturer in any US university, your minimum teaching load will be 4 classes. That means you are teaching, if you are only teaching writing, that means you're teaching 100 students. So if you have 100 students and they are each writing 4 papers, you've got 400 papers to grade over a semester. But since you're doing process, you'll do it at least 3 times. So think of the numbers. That's how much labor the teacher has to put in to actually follow the full process method. So that means teachers come up with time-saving devices, right? Sometimes they don't read the whole thing. They just respond to the surface level. Sometimes they use the peer review method where students, discuss it amongst themselves. Now, for writing classes at Florida State, we were required to hold student conferences twice a semester. And so those saved us a lot of time because you could do group conferences. You could have 5 students at a time come into your office, bring their papers, and they could workshop it amongst themselves. And then you were there to give your own opinion. So the writing conferences also helped in reducing the amount of labor that you did. Now, when I have a lot of friends who are rhetoricians or who are composition scholars. And the irony of composition studies is that, the powerful professors who are tenured, they only teach 2 classes, right? And they are the ones theorizing how composition study ought to be. So my discussion always used to be, you're theorizing about the ideal conditions where you know that a paper is never final and students can revise it anytime, but these courses are taught by underpaid, overworked lecturers and graduate students who do not have the time which you ideally are suggesting they should take. Now, in terms of grading, the process strategy, there are two ways of grading the papers. One is that for each paper, you grade it after the students have turned in the final paper. Or there is another thing that a lot of people recommend, and that is using portfolios. And the portfolio is that the students, you grade the papers, but they build a portfolio. They put all their papers together. And at the end of the semester, they have the option of revising it and giving you their portfolio. The only condition is they have to put in all the drafts in there and then the final revised draft, and then you grade the portfolio. Now, since we are emphasizing the process, the grade isn't about the final paper. Every stage has its points. The first rough draft, the invention strategies will have its point. The rough draft will have its point. The second draft will have its point. The third draft will have its points. So by the time you turn in the final paper, the grade on that paper would be cumulative. Because what you're trying to emphasize is process, writing as a process. So you don't want to grade the final outcome. They have to follow the process to make a full grade on their paper, because that's what you're trying to emphasize. So overall, just to sum up, and the process movement is really actually the dominant movement in American composition studies. Technically, you're trying to teach the students the process of research, how to look up sources, then how to gather them, how to evaluate them, and how to then use those sources to write a paper. That's what you're doing on the larger scale. On the smaller scale, as they compose their paper, as they write it, you're also trying to teach them how to craft their sentences, how to make the paper more cohesive and coherent, how to argue better. That's on a smaller technical level. But philosophically, what you're trying to inculcate in their mind is that writing is a process, which means they have to give themselves time to do their research, time to do their, pre-writing exercises, and then get to the writing. And that every piece of writing is heavily revised and revisited until you reach the final product. That is what we are trying to teach them. In my experience, had I not taken those two first-year writing classes when I came to America, I would have probably not improved my writing. Those two courses kind of grounded me in the process of writing one way or the other. They taught me, what is the process to follow, because the system of education that I came through from the military academy, Pakistan military academy, yes, we were taught English, and for our final year, we had to write a research paper, but no one taught us how to do research. No one taught us what plagiarism was, we were just expected to write a research paper. So I think it's beneficial to students. Now, first-year writing also serves another purpose, that is where you also teach your students what plagiarism is and why not to do it. And actually, each instructor usually has a day, a period or two where they go over either a document prepared by the department or by the instructor themselves, where all forms of plagiarism is explained and discussed. And then at the end of the class, the students actually sign that piece of paper that is given to them, declaring that they have been taught and informed what is plagiarism and why they shouldn't do it. And the instructor holds that on record, so that if someone later is caught plagiarizing, you can prove to any committee that's investigating it that the student was taught and signed the document that said they were taught what plagiarism is and why not to do it. So these are some of my thoughts about the process writing and first year writing. And I do have a presentation because, Dr. Kaneen, my wife, she's the one who did this workshop previously, and she's, of course, more experienced at it, and she had more materials that she prepared. I will get a copy of those materials and send them to Iram, unless Iram already has them, and then we can share her presentation and actually the materials that she has created for you to use to make your own course. We'll share those with you to augment, what briefly I've just talked about. Now, I'm not sure how Pakistani educational system is organized. I'm not sure if all colleges and universities are required to offer these writing courses, and if they are, how they are offered, how they're how they're structured. So that's where you get to educate me. But if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer those.